Namaste, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another session of Yoga Insights. So today's session will feature Ashtanga yoga teacher Teune Wildt. And Teune has been teaching yoga for over 15 years, and he continues to make regular trips to practice Ashtanga yoga under Param Guru Sharad Joyce in Mysore. As a level 2 authorized teacher, he heads a Mysore program in Belgium, in Antwerp, and he is also a trainee of Veda chanting with Shantala Sri Ramaya ji. In this session, he will take us on a short journey to explore the hidden clues that can be found in our everyday postural yoga class. And he's doing this specifically from a non-academic point of view and from the perspective outside of India. So let's welcome Teune. Would you like to join us, please? Namaste.
Namaste.
Thank you so much for joining us this evening. So I'm going to hand over the session to you, and I'll see all of you towards the end when we open for questions. Thanks.
Thank you so much for having me, Sophia. And I will start sharing my screen. And I hope you can all see the slideshow with clear images. So welcome. In this session, I invite you to go on a little trip with me, following my own thought process as a yoga enthusiast, as a non-academic, and from outside of India. As yoga is foreign to my culture, it has been quite a journey to try and understand the how, but also the why we practice. And obviously, yoga nowadays speaks to people everywhere. It really is a universal science of mental and physical well-being. To start, I will recite a couple of mantras to honor the lineage of teachers, the Guru Parampara, and to invoke also Ganapati for an auspicious start, and calling onto Goddess Saraswati for a clear and true speech. If you know these mantras, then please chant along. Otherwise, you can just enjoy the sound. Om Shri Guru Bhyo Namaha Harihi Om Ganana Antva Ganapati Gum Havamahe Kavin Kavina Mupamashravastamam Jeshtarajam Brahmanam Brahmanaspata Anashrinvannoti Bhisida Sadanam Mahaganapataye Namaha Prano Devi Saraswati Vajebhirvajinivati Dhinama Vitriyavatu Ano Divo Brahataf Parvatada Saraswati Yajata Gantu Yajnam Havan Devi Jujushana Kritachi Shakman No Vachamushati Shrinotu Vagdevyai Namaha. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. I would like to acknowledge and thank a few very important teachers who have really opened the doors to a better understanding of yoga and shown the way for consistent practice. So firstly, Sharad Joyce, who upholds the great legacy of his grandfather Patabi Joyce and has been teaching thousands of asana practitioners from around the globe for several decades now. Also from the Ashtanga Institute in Mysore, Lakshmi Shabhat, who is the home priest of the Joyce family, and he teaches Sanskrit, philosophy, and chanting to the thousands of Ashtanga practitioners who go there every year. And last but not least, Shantala Sri Ramaya, currently my main mentor, who continues to lay out Veda recitation or Veda Adhyayanam and inspires so many students around the world. I was lucky to meet Shantalaji in my home country, Belgium, where she resides, but she's actually available to people around the world through a brilliant teaching platform. She comes from a devout family in Bangalore, and her main guru is M.S. Srinivasan from the Chalakere brothers. So my pranams to these important teachers. So in today's presentation, we will be picking up breadcrumbs. So we're gonna go on a kind of hunting trail for information, picking up little pieces, clues that can be found in a common modern day postural yoga class. This is my own perspective, but I believe it is also the perspective of many people around the world, both outside of India, but perhaps also in India. And some of us are foreigners to India, some of us maybe not. Some of us are non-academics like myself, but I also noticed that on this platform, there is a lot of academics that power this platform. So it is wonderful to be in this great company. So before we start picking up on these clues, I just want to situate the content of my own practice. And the two pillars of my practice currently are asana, that is the yoga postures as taught by the Joyce family in Mysore in the tradition of Sri Krishnamacharya. And secondly, recitation of Vedic texts such as Veda mantra, but also yoga sutras and various stotrams. I'm learning this mainly from Shantala Sri Ramayana, who is a direct student of M.S. Srinivasan from Bangalore. Now, a little short trigger warning before we continue. I am sensitive to displays of inappropriate behavior by certain past gurus, and it is possible that some viewers may be offended by the use of their image. But for the sake of my storyline today, I chose not to omit any historical figures. So, when we talk about the first pillar of yoga practice, in this case, asana, I specifically refer to what we know as ashtanga yoga. And this term was coined by Patabi Joyce, and by this name today, in today's yoga scene, we mean the various series of postures, such as the primary series, which is also known as chikitsa, roga chikitsa or yoga chikitsa, because they are therapeutic, so they are healing for the body. Then we have intermediate series of postures that are known as nadi shodhana, because these postures work on purifying the nervous system. And then there is advanced series also, but that is really only for the students who basically can't get enough and who want to further develop strength and flexibility. Now, these postures are not only put in a specific order, as we see, for example, in the sun salutation, there is already a certain sequence that we follow, but also in all of the other parts of the sequence and in the entirety of different sequences as well. So on these charts, we have this kind of overview a little bit of what these different sequences look like. But each posture also has a specific set of movements linked to inhalation and exhalation to get in and out of the pose. And this is what we call vinyasa, which means to place specific actions in a particular order for a particular certain chosen result. So in this case, vinyasa means that we link every movement and every shape that the body takes to either an inhale or an exhale. And these movement breath connections are linked in a chain. The best known example, of course, is the sun salutation, as you can see on this image. But also every posture is integrated in such a similar sequence as the sun salutation. We never actually practice any posture without doing vinyasa. So this is the very specific way of teaching in the tradition of Krishnamacharya, and specifically the Joyce family. They teach this until today. So this is physically challenging. And I think this is also the reason why this kind of style of yoga, as we can call it, has become so popular. So popular that many foreign students have developed their own methods of teaching based on it. And nowadays, freestyle types of vinyasa flow, as it is called, are extremely popular all around the world. And there is a kind of a duality that we can perceive there. On one hand, it's great that so many people are benefiting from these movement systems to just get healthier bodies. But on the other hand, all these creative movement practices that are existing today are often merely based loosely on yoga, and they often ignore the deeper sense of yoga. And yoga actually never solely is a practice for the body. But let's take the high road and perceive beyond this duality, because yoga doesn't need us. We need yoga, and people will naturally be drawn to it. For me personally, I'm very curious. I'm also can be very skeptical, and I always want to know more about the origins and the reasons why we practice in a certain way. So if a person goes to a vinyasa flow type class, or even what sometimes may be called power yoga, the first clues are actually already there. If you have a curious mind, like I have, you will want to understand at least the meaning of those words. What is vinyasa? What is yoga? And then when we look into that, we will eventually find out that this type of fluid, flowing yoga was actually spread into the world during the yoga revival that happened in the 20th century, thanks to Krishnamacharya and his students. Krishnamacharya taught many students, and some of them became world-renowned teachers in their own right. And many of them have established institutes that are reaching hundreds and thousands of people to this day. And so if you're already practicing, for example, Iyengar yoga or Ashtanga yoga, then that postural yoga gives you a connection with the lineage that is uninterrupted. And actually the information is readily available to you. So you can simply ask your teacher for more background information if you are practicing, for example, Iyengar yoga or Ashtanga yoga. So some of the most influential teachers in the lineage of Krishnamacharya are, let's have a look. Of course, Sri Krishna Patabi Joyce, Sri B.K.S. Iyengar, Sri Desikachar, Sri A.G. Mohan, and Sri B.N.S. Iyengar. So some of them have passed away and others are still teaching today. All of these teachers, they were or still teach asana, pranayama, but always also yoga philosophy and mantra. They all have a daily devotional routine, which they usually don't consider to be separate from their yoga practice. So knowing this, if you are curious and you look into the origin of where your style of yoga is coming from, and you look at purely the people that are responsible for passing this style of yoga on, you can already be exposed to a lot of depth in the yoga philosophy, for example. So these are breadcrumbs, just by following the lineage, and we will pick them up, we will put them in our pocket, and we will hold onto them for later. So let's look at these gurus for the so-called Ashtanga yoga lineage for a minute, because they are so famous for teaching that physical practice, but they were actually very scholarly. Sri Krishnamacharya was a great Vedic scholar, And besides teaching yoga, he was also an Ayurvedic healer. He made very important academic contributions, and he was teaching throughout all of India. Then there is Pattabhi Jois, who was the utmost longtime student of Krishnamacharya. He was a master in yoga philosophy and Sanskrit, and he taught at the Sanskrit College in Mysore. He published 2 very important works that are available in English. And then we have grandson Sharad Jois, and he himself has a keen interest in philosophy. He knows many scriptures by heart, and he also has published an essential book on yoga. So here we see them all 3 in beautiful samastitihi. So this kind of symbolizes the physical aspect of the yoga practice. But here you can also see them in their more, let's say, devotional mood or scholarly mood. So the next breadcrumb, once we know this, if you are a really curious student, you will want to know more about these teachers. And if you know that they have published certain books, then definitely you will want to read up on that. So now we have looked at where our yoga practice is coming from, right? We have looked at the lineage and kind of the sort of academic background that is situated around it. Now let's pick up on the next breadcrumb and just simply look at the name of the style of yoga, because these sequences of asanas that were so cleverly named ashtanga by Pattabhi Jois, what does that actually mean? Ashtanga is a word, Sanskrit word, that is made of 2 words. Ashtau, which is a number 8, and anga, which means limb or part. Then the second part of the title, yoga, is a word that describes the science of unifying the individual soul with universal consciousness. In other words, enlightenment. So Ashtanga Yoga is the name for the 8-fold path of yoga, classical yoga. And this can be found in the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali. So the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali is considered the classical standard of yoga. So that's why it's also called classical yoga. And it's sometimes also called Raja Yoga. So we have now found a huge breadcrumb of information. This is very, very important. It is the most important clue so far. And we can say that Pattabhi Jois was very clever in that sense, because it's almost as if he expected or he knew that people would get obsessed with the physical culture of asana and possibly ignore the broader sense or the broader dimension of yoga. So by naming the practice that he was teaching, the physical practice, by naming it Ashtanga, he made sure that that information about the deeper sense of yoga is right in our face, and we just can't ignore it. So even if we are just practicing asana for many years, because it's all we know, once that we find out that there is this link to classical yoga, then definitely we will want to know more about it. So then there is a little picture here of just a few books on my bookshelf, different versions of the Yoga Sutras. So if you are curious about the Yoga Sutras, then definitely you will want to look at different translations and different commentaries. So the Yoga Sutras, when they talk about Ashtanga Yoga, in Sutra 29 of the second chapter, so Sadhana Pada, the chapter on practice, it says, Yamani yamasana pranayama pratyahara dharana dhyana samadhayoshtabhangani. So the 8 limbs of yoga are the restraints, yama, observances, niyama, posture, asana, breath extension, pranayama, sense withdrawal, pratyahara, concentration, dharana, meditation, dhyana. And then we have samadhi, which is the elevation of consciousness, basically. So the different stages of higher meditation, with enlightenment as the final destination. So today, of course, we're not going to go very deep into this subject of the Eightfold Path and the Yoga Sutras, because that's a whole subject in itself. But this breadcrumb of information can definitely not be ignored by any yoga seeker that is a little bit serious. And I think as a student, we should try to look for instruction on this subject, look for a teacher that can teach us, and also keep doing self-reflection on this very important text. Now let's follow more clues as we go through a regular yoga session. Normally, every yoga session starts with a mantra. Sometimes it's just simply Om, can be 1 time Om or 3 times Om, that can be it, and that's fine. In the ashtanga format, there are a few invocations that we recite, and I will just recite them here. Om Vande Gurunan Charana Ravinde Sandarshita Swatma Sukhavabodhe Nishreyase Jangalika Yamane Samsara Hala Hala Moha Shantyai Abahu Purushakaram Shankha Dharinam Sahasrashirasam Shvetam Pranamami Patanjalim. So we just follow the same principle by picking up pieces of information. And if you are a curious yoga student, then surely you will want to know what you are chanting in this perhaps foreign language, Sanskrit, at the beginning of class. And why are we chanting it? So the first part is a verse from the Yoga Taravali by Adi Shankara. And knowing this, the student can then discover that Shankaracharya is a very important saint who in his very short lifespan was able to master the essence of Indic Knowledge Systems. He wrote brilliant commentaries, bhashyas, on the existing philosophies, and he composed numerous poems on various topics. And each of them is quite exquisite. He's considered the founder of Advaita Vedanta. And so it's very interesting that he also composed this text on Hatha Yoga. So this is the little booklet that has the Yoga Taravali. And I would like to quote the commentary by Desikacharya, so the son of Krishnamacharya, who was also a lifelong student of his father. And he published this translation with commentary in English. So you can see the translation on the screen, and I will just read out the commentary. So here, Sri Adi Shankara begins by prostrating to his own teacher, as well as to the lineage of teachers he comes from, before beginning to present his work. It is customary in the Indian tradition to offer our salutations to the source of any wisdom as a sign of humility, and also to seek the blessing of the teachers before commencing any work that is important and worthy of credit. By acknowledging his teacher, Adi Shankara also subtly indicates that he has learned this teaching from his teacher and wishes that we too follow his example so that we are guided carefully and correctly. Only then will we attain a state of mind that is characterized by peace, clarity, and joy. And this is because the study of yoga is experiential. It's not just intellectual. So it's important that someone who has experienced yoga in the truest sense of the word leads us. And this is also the message of Patanjali in his Yoga Sutras. So here the metaphor, so when you read the translation, the metaphor of a snake charmer, the Jangalika, used by Shankara is very symbolic. He emphasizes that through the teacher, so the snake charmer stands for the teacher, the poison in us, and the poison here means our ignorance, which causes misery in our lives, that poison comes under control, much like the snake charmer is controlling a venomous snake. When talking about the web of samsara, Adi Shankara refers to the problems that arise through the body and mind, as well as in our communication. So here we see actually the three levels of action. So physical action, mental action, and action through words. So these are the means by which all our troubles originate and manifest themselves. It's also important to note that Shankara talks about reducing our troubles, not just destroying them. This is because he doesn't want us to reject our troubles, but work towards resolving them. So that's the end of the quote. And I think it's a beautiful commentary on this very fascinating verse. So in any Ashtanga class, we quote this, and therefore we also acknowledge the lineage of gurus that came before us. But we also pay attention to Hatha Yoga, because it's a work on Hatha Yoga. And also we are exposed to Shankara. So in this text, the Yogattaravali, which is a text on Hatha Yoga, the inner limbs of yoga are described. So pranayama, sense withdrawal, concentration, meditation, and then the subsequent stages of absorption of consciousness into itself. And these are the stages of samadhi. So it's the same process as described in Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, with the final stage being asamprajñata samadhi, where our conscious or our subconscious is being rid of the samskaras, and a new permanent samskara that connects us to the highest reality is imprinted. Interestingly, this stage is called as Yoga Nidra in Shankaracharya's work. So the terminology between the Yoga Sutras and the Yogattaravali can be quite different, but the process and the final achievement of yoga are not different at all. So they're both saying the same thing. So then we have the second stotram, the second part of the Ashtanga opening call. The Ashtanga opening call is a Patanjali invocation. And here, as you can read, the symbolical shape of the Maharishi is described as being half human, half snake. And the snake represents Adishesha, which symbolizes the substratum of knowledge, which is always present in the universe, and which from time to time returns to humanity, in this case through Patanjali's teachings. He's also described as being bright because he shines forth the ultimate knowledge. And he has countless heads, which signifies the divine vision. He holds a conch, which produces the primordial sound, which is the vibration that we know as Om. And he holds a discus. A discus stands for time, and the fact that it is round shows that time is circular. And finally, he holds a sword. The sword stands for Viveka. This is the discriminative knowledge. And that is the ability to separate illusion from reality. So these are quite important breadcrumbs because they point us to important sages and the philosophies that are presented by them. So in this very brief moment at the beginning of every Ashtanga yoga class that you practice, the student is being invited to become curious, to want to know more about Shankara, about Patanjali, and will find their way to the wisdom traditions of Hatha Yoga, for one, but through Shankaracharya also to Advaita Vedanta, and of course to Raja Yoga or classical yoga, which are just synonyms for the Eightfold Path, which is Ashtanga Yoga in Sanskrit. So that is the philosophy of Patanjali, the last one. Now, all of these philosophies are interested in what actually? So now we kind of turn to what is the reason why we practice yoga? What is the goal? And the goal is to find lasting happiness. You can also consider it to be true freedom. And how do we obtain this? Through a radically correct vision of the reality. So now our breadcrumb trail has brought us to the final goal of yoga already. This is quite amazing, simply by following these few clues. But of course, it can take several years for the student to kind of become aware of these. But we have discovered that the purpose of yoga is actually moksha, or liberation. And if we use the terminology from classical yoga, we can state that the means as well as the purpose of yoga is samadhi. Samadhi is the process of realizing, remembering, and upholding the truth about existence, and to retain that vision of reality permanently in our mind. Now, there's only two ways to attain samadhi, and that is firstly through practice, and secondly through grace. What is the difference? Practice is the effort to stay in a state of mind which is free from distraction. Repetition of all the 8 limbs of yoga every day. But in the end, we can only try so much. We can only do so much. There are so many unknown variables, so many unknown circumstances that we really can't influence, that influence us. So we can't really plan for liberation to happen. So after putting in the work, it is out of our hands. So it's only through divine intervention, or if you will, through the right circumstances, that we could eventually be liberated. So the final result is actually up to a higher power. So when we talk about practice, sadhana, we use Patanjali's system of 8 steps from the 2nd chapter. And we can clearly see that there is a logical order in the 8 limbs. And we're always told that we should pay attention to all the aspects simultaneously. But at the same time, it's undeniable that there is a certain inward evolution that we can see if we follow the 8 parts as they are listed, because they're not listed in this order by accident. So when we begin this process of involution, we begin by applying yama. The yamas are the sort of observances which harmonize our existence with our environment. We then go to niyama and we build inner stamina, character, and a good mood. So these are kind of the restraints. And then we have asana, which is the preparation for sitting comfortably in a meditative posture. Pranayama is the strengthening of the subtle body as a preparation for the inner work. An extension of prana is like shining a light on the relationship between matter and consciousness. Next is pratyahara, the bridge between the outer limbs, the bahirangas, and the inner limbs, the antarangas. This is when the senses are uncoupled from their objects, and the senses are turned inwards towards pure awareness. Next is dharana, concentration, and that is the effort of fixing the awareness on a single place. When that concentration becomes effortless and spontaneous, only then can we speak of dhyana meditation. And then we start to ascend through the different levels of higher meditation. And that is the process of samadhi. And once that is put in motion, it happens without effort, it happens spontaneously. So both the Yoga Sutra and Yogatravali describe this same process, just with slightly different vocabulary. So let's go to the next slide. This is just a slide from that kind of represents a scheme of the different levels of samadhi. So it's quite technical, and I don't want you to worry about it. But as you can see, it starts at the bottom with pratyahara. So that is the bridge from the outer limbs to the inner limbs. And then we move through dharana, concentration, dhyana, meditation, up into different levels of samadhi. And this scheme is from the commentary by Vachaspati Mishra. So in the beginning, there is still a lot of analytical thinking taking place in the initial stages of samadhi. So there is deliberation, vitarka. And once that is transcended, vichara is the next stage. It's the phase of reflection where the knowledge of any object is absorbed. And then the mind is gradually further emptied of any impressions in the subsequent stages. And we're not going to go deeper into this now, because this is a whole study in itself. But what we can take from this is that both the practice of yoga, so all the 8 limbs together, and the final destination of yoga, which are the stages of samadhi, very clearly have this involution from gross to subtle, from external to internal, from matter to consciousness, if you will. So now, our breadcrumb trail has led us to a very refreshing view on our true essence. So the fact that we can work towards liberation, freedom from suffering in this lifetime is quite amazing. So by accidentally walking into a yoga class and simply following these little clues, we can be exposed to an incredible wealth of wisdom of the Indic Knowledge Systems. So I'm completely new to this. I've never been exposed to this before in my life. I'm just some guy in Europe who likes this physical yoga practice. But now my curiosity is kindled even more by this information. But samadhi is such a lofty goal, and it seems so far away. So what do I do with it? Well, all I can do is keep practicing, study a bit more, and of course, have faith. So now we have seen this process of involution from matter to consciousness, if you want, from more individual action to a more broader awareness of the universality of things. And so this process from gross to subtle is very important in the process of yoga. So I'll just start to share a few general insights that we can get from this framework, from gross to subtle, because it also exists in our regular daily practice. And it's also present in the way that it's been taught by us, to us. And I think I may say that it seems like the traditional Indian methods of teaching are somehow informed from this place of samadhi. And as a foreigner, that is quite a revelation in itself. And I still remember in the lecture by my wonderful colleague, Claudette Evans, who gave a talk here on Indica earlier. She shared that in general, our minds in today's society are educated in very dualistic thinking modes. And she said that a lot of us feel that, and I quote, "When I'm not getting it right, I must be getting it wrong," end of quote. And this is true. We tend to think in terms of success and failure. Now, yoga teaches us right away that we can and we should go beyond these dualities. So don't grade yourself while learning on the yoga path. It's a process that unfolds magically simply by nurturing it. It's a matter of observing, not a matter of performing. Moving from gross to subtle cannot be forced. It can only be experienced through increased awareness. But for that, of course, we need a little concentration effort. So now I will describe some evolutions in the way that we are taught and in the way that we are experiencing our practice. So I'm drawing on both pillars of my own practice, which are asana and, let's call it, mantra or recitation. And I want to clarify that in no way I am comparing the two subjects with each other, because that would be comparing apples to oranges. These two separate methods need to be studied with a qualified and experienced teacher. So what is comparable is the increased refinement that we experience as we become more established. In both practices, the aspirant tries to pay attention to all the guidelines simultaneously. So I will talk about a few practice guidelines or rules, if you want. And in general, they are not really taught exactly in an ascending order. So we are taught that we should pay attention to them simultaneously. However, there is a visible gradual refinement that we can observe in the instruction. And that refinement is from reasonable to difficult. And everything that is difficult at first will become reasonable only by repeated practice. And this is obvious, but different people will excel in different aspects of the practice. So even though there is an ascending refinement, this will not be the same process for everybody. Each student's talents and learning curve are quite unique. So now I will use a few rules of Vedic recitation or chanting as kind of a framework for that refinement that we can experience in our own practice. And so the thing is that I will also compare this with the refinement that we experience in our physical asana practice. And again, in no way I am comparing the two practices, but I just want to show that there is this process of refining consciousness from gross to subtle happening through both practices if we follow the method that is prescribed by our teachers and by the tradition. And in my experience, that happens in both those practices. So the first rule of Vedic chanting is Varna, and this is pronunciation. So we have Sanskrit letters. Of course, the language is always Sanskritam. And when you're first exposed to this new language, if it's new for you, then of course you see all of these letters, and some of the sounds perhaps are new. And it's kind of like when you are first introduced to yoga asana, when you go to yoga classes, you see all of these postures and you're trying to execute the postures. When you're trying to pronounce Sanskrit words, you're basically trying to pronounce the letters, the sounds, and that is our first gross step. Now, next, we realize that they're actually placed in a logical order. And then we perhaps also start to understand that they are placed, why they are placed in a specific order. And in the case of Sanskritam, the letters are sequenced according to the place of action in the mouth, in the speech organ, from the back of the throat all the way to the lips. Each family of letters is produced using different actions of the muscles of the throat, the mouth, and the tongue. So there is no way we can learn to hope, to learn mantra without first learning correct pronunciation. And the same is true when we learn yoga poses. We also start understanding that there are families of poses. For example, you have always at the start of the session, you have sun salutations. And there are standing poses, there are seated forward folds, there are arm balances, supine postures, prone postures, and so on. And they're always grouped together for a reason. So once we start practicing more, we improve our pronunciation of the sounds of Sanskrit. And then we also refine our organ of speech. So learning to correctly pronounce Sanskrit words is actually also has a very great physical and mental benefit. In asana, of course, we learn to use the different muscle groups correctly so that we are steady in the pose. And there is already a more subtle dimension happening here, because apart from only learning separate letters, in Sanskritam, we also learn that certain sounds must change when they are spoken one after the other. So we have, for example, at the bottom of the alphabet sheet here, you can see there is Anusvara and Visarga. So Anusvara is a nasal ending, and Visarga is another special ending. Both can change depending on the sound that follows it. Yeah. So for example, Bhadrang karne bhishrunuyama devaha. So I have marked the Anusvara, so that's the M with the dot underneath in yellow. When it is followed by a K from the guttural family, the Anusvara changes also to a guttural nasal sound, which is Ang. So Bhadrang karnebhi. The same goes for the Visarga. So that's the H with the dot underneath. When it's followed by a sibilant, the Visarga takes on that same sound. So we kind of double that sibilant. Karne bhishrunu yama devaha. So this shows that not only knowing the correct pronunciation of the letters is important, but also it's important to know how to link them. Now, in our asana sequences, each posture can exist within its own right. It has a specific way of entering and exiting through a vinyasa sequence. And I will just check if I have another slide for that. No. Each pose is counted from samastitihi, and the count ends back in samastitihi. That's what we call full vinyasa. But when we join the postures one after the other sequentially, we drop parts of the entry and the exit sequence. For example, between most seated postures, we do not come back to standing, but we connect all the postures by jumping back and forth between sitting. So both in the pronunciation of simple words as well as in performing the most basic asanas and the sun salutation, the first thing you learn is the best example actually. Expert guidance of the teacher is very much needed. Otherwise, we cannot lay the foundation for the refinement of focus, because we definitely see that there is more to it than just pronouncing separate sounds with the alphabet or performing separate postures. So the next rule in Vedic chanta is, in Vedic chanting is svara. And in svara, we mean intonation. So in Veda mantra, we generally use 3 notes, a low, a middle, and a high note. So let me just give the example here with Sahana Vavatu. Om Sahana Vavatu, Sahanau Punaktu. So in that first line of the mantra, you see the first sa goes down, Sahana, and the third long a goes up, Sahana Vavatu. The rest of the word is on the middle note. So if you're reading the Roman alphabet or the Devanagari, you will see that there are extra markings that will indicate the note. It's always either low, middle, or high. So these different notes, these 3 notes, are binding our concentration to the sounds that we are producing and to this whole mantra that we are reciting. Now, in the case of asana, once we've learned the basics, we are improving our alignment in the poses, so that we are not only more steady, but also more comfortable. We are really working on the grounding energy while extending upwards simultaneously. Again, forgive me, I'm comparing apples to oranges here because these are 2 totally different practices. But if you practice asana, I think you will understand that this feels like a more subtle refinement when you're really working on alignment. And that requires a lot of focus and effort. And the same goes for svara. When you're learning svara, there is a lot of effort required in the beginning. Now, matra, the duration of each syllable. So in Vedic recitation, this is non-negotiable, and this is one of the reasons it's different from music. We have short and long vowels, and sometimes half a count or extended counts are also required. Now, so the example I gave here are 3 letters. So you have an A, which is a short vowel, so just 1 count. The second letter is A, which is a long vowel. The third letter is half a count because it has no vowel, so it's very difficult to pronounce. So it would sound like K. Now, when we compare this to asana, and I always emphasize this when I'm teaching, but I'm also emphasizing that in my own practice, that counting is so important. The counting happens at different levels, from gross to subtle as well. So after we have learned the gross order of the postures, one after the other, we must learn to count the number of vinyasa movements that are taught with each pose. And once that order of postures and movements are understood, the student should turn their attention to the counting of the number of breaths and vinyasas. So that brings us to the next rule, which is balam. Balam, or force or energy, is the power of breath. So when we are correctly pronouncing Sanskritam letters, we become aware of the power of our breath. There is Alpa Prana, so little energy, and Mahaprana, or big energy. And they're also called non-aspirated and aspirated sounds. So the example I gave here is the word Padma. Padma, the pa sound is not aspirated. In the second word, Palam, the P is aspirated. So you need to use a lot more of your breath. So sometimes in our asana with vinyasa practice, The breath needs to be explosive. Sometimes it needs to be long and extended. And we never truly hold the breath as in a kumbhaka, but there are brief instances when a little extra momentum is generated by extending the end of the exhalation or even the inhalation. So the managing of the power of our breath in our asana practice is also very important. And then last but not least, santana. Santana is fluidity, also known as punctuation. So when reciting scripture, we respect vocabulary and grammar. And so when words are joined together, there may be some pauses between two words or between two phrases at certain places. But in other places, we cannot pause because that could alter the meaning of the word. And there are different rules that are playing out here. So it's kind of helpful to know a little bit of Sanskrit. The example that I gave here, Swastina Indro Vridhashravaha. So what is marked in yellow is na, short vowel, followed by Indro, which is also short vowel. So then there is a very short pause. Second example, Swastina Starkshyo Arishtanemihi. O is a long vowel. So when a long vowel is followed by a vowel, there must be a full pause. Now, in our asana practice, fluidity not only comes by stamina and flexibility, but more so by the ability to mentally focus. While breathing correctly, we should be silently naming all the names of the postures in our head and keep counting all of the numbers of vinyasas and numbers of breaths. I call this external counting, the counting of actions. And at the end of our sequence, when we sit in Padmasana for deep breathing, we can shift our mental counting to the inside of our breath. And by that, I mean that we count the duration of the inhalation and the duration of the exhalation, while also being aware of the subtle pause between inhale and exhale. So we come at the end of my presentation, and the conclusion that I have from my own experience is that whatever tendencies, samskaras, or distraction one has, they will be revealed through both of these yogic practices. And Veda recitation is definitely revealing more subtle aspects. So it's great to begin with asana, to deal with slightly more tangible habits and obstacles, but mantra should be incorporated from the beginning. And I wish everybody great success in their practice and lots of refinement from gross to subtle. Thank you very much. So Sophia, I will invite you back now.
Namaste, everyone. Thank you so much. There seems to be some kind of disturbance in the screen.
Yes, I see it now.
Is that because of me? I'm going to try restarting. Yeah,
it seems to be okay now.
Yes. Thank you so much for that deeply insightful session and for all the effort you took to explain and make those slides, you know, to have pictorial references always helps. To everyone joining us, I hope you all enjoyed that session, and we're open now for any questions that you all may have for Teune. So please let us know. And while you all are thinking of questions, I'd just like to remind everybody that these sessions are recorded and will be available on the Indica Yoga YouTube channel, on the Indica Yoga website, and also on Indica Yoga social media. So you can always revisit the lovely talk that Teune just gave if you want a reference, and please share the video. I don't see any questions yet. Koti ji, are you there? Because Koti ji had left for 10 minutes, so we'll wait. I think he's here though.
Yes, okay.
Great, great. Just wanted to check. So before we leave, since there are no more, if people are not thinking of questions now, you all can always write to us and we can forward the questions to Teune as well. That has happened in the past. So please let us know. Someone has raised a hand. Can you send a message, please, Agni ji, in the chat or in the Q&A? I hope Agni ji can hear us. So while he's typing, Teune, can we ask you for an email address or website if any of our participants would like to get in touch with you? And Koti ji, would you please share that in the chat with everyone?
Or shall I just type it in the, oh no, yeah, I think everybody can read that, right?
Yeah.
If I type it in chat, is that okay?
Yes, they can.
Yeah.
Can they, Kotiji, please make that message available to everyone? And Agniji, I'm just waiting. There we go. It's tuneyoga@gmail.com. It's just come to hosts and panelists, but Kotiji will be sharing it with all of you. Agniji, I'm not sure what your question was, so please let us know. Okay, he hasn't, maybe he'll write to us. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And there's the website as well. It's www.tuneyoga.yoga. Sorry, Kotiji, can you also please share that with everyone? Before we sign out for the evening, Teune, is there any last message you'd like to share with us?
I just am very grateful to you, to Indica, and of course also to Shantalaji for throwing me to the lions here. So thank you so much.
No, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. And it's been absolutely lovely having you. Thank you so much for being a part of Indica's Yoga Insights. And for everyone else who's watching, have a beautiful weekend and join us again next Friday for our next session. It's going to be with the Vedanta teacher, Ved Chaitanya ji. So I'll see all of you next Friday. Namaste. Oh, wait, I'm so sorry. I think, yes, Agni ji has a question. He says he wants to learn Vedic chanting with correct pronunciation and intonation. Is there someone who can help?
Of course, our teacher, Shantalaji, she has a great platform where anyone around the world can learn. So I will just type the website here. Yeah, we'll type the website, and Kotiji, can you also share that with everyone? vedastudies.com. There it is, www.vedastudies.com. Kotiji, can you please share that? It's also there for everyone to view now. So that's Agniji. I hope that answers your question. Thank you so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next week. Namaste. Namaste. Thank you.